Hi, I'm Loris Alexander. This is Bridge City News, and here are some of the top stories we've been following. The province announced a record-breaking 31 deaths on Saturday as vaccinations continue. Plus, Lethbridge has been selected by Curling Canada to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. And some Lethbridge business owners who are struggling and frustrated say they're going to open their doors fully come Monday.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Thanks for joining us. Alberta reported 989 new cases of COVID-19 and a record 31 additional deaths from the disease on Saturday, according to the latest update posted to the province's website. This brings the total number of deaths from COVID-19 to 1,272. There are 827 people in the hospital due to the disease, 132 of whom are in intensive care. The province performed 13,540 tests on Friday. There are 14,437 active cases of COVID-19 in Alberta, up by 809 from Friday. This is the largest single increase in the active cases since late November. The next live update with Alberta's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, will be on Monday. Curling fans in southern Alberta rejoice. Lethbridge has been selected by Curling Canada to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier. Major curling championships have been held in Lethbridge before, but never a Brier. As Ainsley O'Reilly explains, Lethbridge is one of only a handful of Canadian cities to host all four major curling events.
We're so excited. We can't wait till March of 2022. And thank you to everybody who's been part of this. It's going to be a tremendous success.
The tournament will be held from March 4th through 13th of next year at the NMAC Centre. Back in June, Lethbridge placed their bid, and Curling Canada says it was competitive.
And I can tell you that the competition to host the 2022 Tim Hortons Brier was fierce.
We've invested in curling in our city, and we've had a great history of curlers leaving our city, and we think the future is even brighter.
The city is looking forward to dollars coming in from potential tourism, as well as bringing a bright light to Lethbridge post-COVID-19.
And future hope in 2022 is really a huge boost, not just to our economy, but to our people in general.
Aside from hosting one of Canada's most treasured sports, local curling clubs are looking forward to bringing the community together.
We do hope that we expand this excitement for this to become a 360-degree celebration that includes everybody in Lethbridge and the region.
Lethbridge will become just the fourth city in the country to host all four major Seasons of Champions events: the Tim Hortons Brier, the Scotties Tournament of Hearts, and both men's and women's World Curling Championships. The other cities were Winnipeg, Brandon, and St. John. For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
Alberta will not loosen its current COVID-19 restrictions until January 21st at the earliest. Premier Jason Kenney says with rising COVID-19 cases, our province has to stay the course to help flatten the curve. Many Lethbridge business owners who are struggling are frustrated, and some say they may open their doors regardless fully on Monday.
While measures do need to be in place to stop the spread of COVID-19, and I support some of those measures, we need to take a more holistic approach to public health. Public health isn't just wearing a mask and standing 6 feet apart. Public health is focusing on nutritional protocols and focusing on weight loss, because we know that being overweight and obese is one of the primary risk factors from COVID-19.
The government has clearly said that gyms and hair salons are not spreaders of the virus. Their stats show that. They're the ones doing the contact tracing. They're the ones compiling the numbers. They're saying we weren't the spreaders, and we thank you for doing such a good job, but we're going to shut you down anyways. So they shut us down. And then they go, okay, we'll give you three weeks. Well, 3 weeks is coming, and then, we're going to make it 4 weeks now because the numbers haven't changed. It's still not safe. We're locking the kids out of school. It's not safe for them, although no kids have ever died from COVID. And now all of a sudden we're coming up to the 4-week mark, and they're like, we're going to keep gyms closed, but we're going to let the kids go back to school for their mental health. The numbers haven't changed, so why are kids allowed to go back to school if it's still so dangerous? We weren't open. So how are we the problem? We weren't the problem to start with, and we're still not the problem because we weren't even opening. So how are we spreading the virus?
With COVID-19, the dairy industry is one that has been hit very hard. In addition to challenges from restaurant closures, Canadian milk producers are competing with a growing business of plant-based alternatives. Some say that the future looks bleak, while Alberta Milk remains confident. Ainsley O'Reilly has the details.
In 1972, there were 42,000 dairy farms in Canada. Now there are 11,000. If that trend continues, that number will be cut in half by 2030.
Dairy is not going anywhere. The sector is collapsing.
Alberta Milk argues the opposite, stating they are finding innovative ways to drive consumers.
We're seeing stronger milk production than we've ever seen. We're seeing innovation across the board from on our farms to processors.
Dairy farmers spend about $130 million a year to remind Canadians that they are producing a public good, and Canadians have the duty to consume that public good. That's not a good business model today.
In 2020, the industry of plant-based alternatives in Canada grew by $300 million, an increase of 31% in just 1 year. Consumers are looking for different options. For the first time in Saskatchewan, Regina-based company Mara Food Group will bring production of oat milk to the province. Agri-food is a clear economic driver in southern Alberta, and we could see the province opening its doors to similar operations.
I think there's an awakening in Alberta beyond oil and gas. I mean, I think Alberta is finally seeing its potential in agri-food, and that would include alternatives for sure.
1/4 of the province's dairy farmers are in southern Alberta. That's 150 dairy farmers. So when you buy milk, it could be from someone you know.
You're supporting that family that's maybe on your hockey team, that sits in your church group, that contributes to your local fundraiser. These are local families that you're supporting when you choose to buy dairy products.
For Bridge City News, I'm Ainsley O'Reilly.
If you're looking to get rid of your live Christmas tree, the farm at the Lethbridge corn maze is accepting drop-offs. Surprisingly, real trees are a natural dewormer for the goats and are quite nutritious for them. Video journalist Micah Quinn has the details.
There are approximately 50 female goats on Theo Slingerland's farm, and he's asking for Lethbridge residents to drop off their live Christmas trees in the farm parking lot for a little snack for the goats.
Christmas trees are, usually evergreens, right? So they have needles on them, and in the needles, there's something in the needles that will help the goats deworming. So I don't know exactly how it works, but I know it is used in many places. The tree itself, the bark as well, has some nutritional value and also for deworming as well. So in the needles is also a very high amount of vitamin C, and goats are pretty much one of the few animals that will truly eat them. In nature, they will go into a forest, and if you let them run loose, your forest will be gone eventually.
Slingerland says that it's healthy for the goats to eat the trees.
We're looking at probably a tree for every 12 goats a day. They will eat the needles, they will eat the bark, and there's other benefits in there as well, like there's some trace minerals in there, there's some vitamins in there, C and A I believe it is in there. So it's very good for them. And of course it's a nice way of recycling your tree, it doesn't go to waste.
The female goats have been bred for May, and some just a little earlier.
Most of the goats have 2 babies each, so by the summer we should have at least maybe 100 baby goats as well.
The Lethbridge corn maze is closed for the winter season, but they're hoping to do goat snuggling when the baby goats arrive. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
When their in-person family retreat was canceled due to COVID-19, the Rivera family was heartbroken. But coronavirus couldn't stop Joni and friends from encouraging special needs families, and provisions were made for family retreat at home. Dan and Sandra received a personal invitation from their New England staff, letting them know they were wanted and valued.
Didn't really get introduced into the ministry until this year. The church that we've been going to, the pastor called us one day and said, hey, every year we like to sponsor a family at the church and send them to the family retreat. In this case, the New England family.
We went online and we kind of, checked them out and see what they were all about, and then we got to learn more about their mission and what they believed in. At first, it was really shocking to see that there was an organization that actually did something like this.
Recapping one of our top news stories, Alberta reported 989 new cases of COVID-19 and a record 31 additional deaths from the disease on Saturday, according to the latest update posted to the province's website. This brings the total number of deaths from COVID-19 to 1,272. And taking a look at weekend weather, looks like we're in for lots of sunshine this week. Skies should be clear overnight with a west wind gusting from 40 to 60 and a low of 0 degrees. On Monday, sunshine becomes a mix of sun and cloud later in the morning with more wind and a high of +8. After the break, Jeanette Rocher talks to the CEO and clinical director of a new health center in downtown Lethbridge opening early this year. Stay tuned.
We all want to stay healthy, especially as we enter flu and cold season. Today's guest owns and operates a growing health clinic in Lethbridge. Dr. Sean Hankey, CEO and clinical director of East Meets West Health Center, also known as 608 Health. He joins me via Skype from his office here in Lethbridge. Dr. Hankey, welcome to Bridge City News. It's so great to have you on.
Thank you.
First of all, Dr. Hankey, tell us about your plans to open up your brand new building downtown called 608 Health. So with the new location, will this bring some changes for your clinic as to how you provide healthcare services for your patients?
Most definitely. Our model will still remain the same. We're just adding, I guess, more conventional mainstream healthcare modalities to the team by adding basic family health docs, as well as specialists, a full dental clinic, including hygiene, pharmacy, as well as we'll have childcare on site for our patients, eliminate one of the barriers to access some of the services.
Now, are you excited to be a part of the city's efforts to revitalize the downtown core?
I am. The city has actually been really good to work with throughout this project. Obviously, a project of this magnitude doesn't happen overnight. It's been a few years of working with the city, trying to find an appropriate location. We always wanted to be in the center of the city for ease of accessibility for all our patients. And that the city was really good to work with. And we hope that we're the catalyst for that revitalization of the downtown.
What are some of the positive things you're hearing from the downtown community?
The downtown community is really excited to have a service like ours, a clinic like ours. The building that we're building right now is 18,000 square feet. So it was a major renovation that we've done. It was an existing single-story building that we've put a second story on, really modernized that building. It was built originally in the 1970s. So we've put a little bit of a modern flair on that downtown corner.
Oh, sounds lovely. I can't wait to see it when it's done. And speaking of which, it sounds like this has been a long process. It's been in the works for a while, hasn't it?
Yeah, it has. Finding the appropriate location as well as the staffing and like-minded individuals, healthcare professionals that really understand our model, because our model is very unique and different than most.
Yeah, and so you're currently on the north side location and you're going to be moving into downtown, so you're not quite there yet. When are you actually opening your doors downtown?
We're hoping for February, end of February, early March to actually start seeing our patients within there. There's a lot that still needs to happen, but we're very optimistic that we can get it done by end of February.
And by the way, I'm guessing that you have likely gotten a few questions about the new company name and what it means. So what does 608 Health stand for?
Well, we went through a really extensive rebrand process. I've owned East Meets West for 16 years. So that name was created when I was just a standalone acupuncture clinic. So the name was really fitting. But as we've grown and expanded the healthcare modalities included, the name we wanted to rebrand. So we went through an extensive process. We came up with 608. The simple version of it is 608 is the address of the building. However, when you look at 608, our vision for our brand is limitless health, endless possibility. So if you look at 608, it kind of looks like go, and then if you turn the 8 on its side, it's infinity. So go infinity. It really follows the vision of our brand.
Okay, and then like you said, it's your address too, right?
Correct. 608 Fifth Ave South.
That's kind of cool. Okay, yeah. So what's the overall vision of your health clinic? And can you share maybe a bit of your background story of coming to this point?
So my background is I'm a doctor of Chinese medicine. I went to school in Vancouver, did some internship work in China, worked there for 6 months. I guess that was my first taste of really seeing Western medicine, Chinese medicine working together instead of opposing one another. The treatment plans that were laid out gave patients options as to which direction to go, as well as they communicated amongst the two modalities, and the results were amazing. So originally for about 4 or 5 years, I was just acupuncture. Then we started to bring on some massage, then chiropractic, physio, those types of modalities started to follow. Our model's a little bit unique in the sense that there are other clinics out there that exist that are a building that house multiple businesses. Our clinic is not like that. Our clinic, everyone is an employee, and we all really work together to find the best solution for our patients. Not every patient is the same. Not every treatment plan is the same for each person. People respond differently to different services. So it's a combination, the collaboration that gives the best results.
Now, you mentioned massage and chiropractic, but your clinic has so many other different types of treatments. Can you tell us what's all available for patients?
Yeah, so we have acupuncture, massage, chiropractic, as mentioned, physiotherapy, naturopathic medicine, medical aesthetics, shockwave therapy, speech language pathology, and then within the future will be sports psychology, regular family GPs, specialty GPs, the two gastroenterologists in town, which we're really fortunate to have with us, as well as a full pharmacy, full dental. We currently own a dental clinic now, just offering independent hygiene services called 608 Dental Hygiene that we've been operating for about 2 years now, which will then move over into the new space with us as well.
Yeah, and now it's not usual to see dental also included in, like a medical clinic. So how did that come about?
On the dental side, I mean, dental is a very important part of our overall health. Like you said, it isn't seen often where it's integrated in a medical type of a clinic, but we felt that it fit really well within our model. What we put in our mouth is the first step of our health, and that's why the dental side of it is very important.
Well, that's a really good point. So alternative health is becoming more widely accepted in today's society. So what would you say to someone who's considering something like acupuncture or naturopathic medicine, for example, and what would you describe as the overall benefits of these treatments?
Most of the allied health modalities, such as acupuncture and naturopathic medicine, we look at things from the root of the problem rather than just treating the branch. Why are these symptoms happening? And it is a collaborative effort. I truly believe that oftentimes you need multiple modalities working together to find the solution. Sometimes you can get really good results with just doing one thing, but from our experience, what we've seen is when we can attack something from multiple levels, multiple disciplines, we're going to get the best results. We're treating the body as a whole rather than dissecting each individual symptom and treating that symptom individually.
Interesting. Okay, so now with the onset of winter, it seems that various flus and coughs seem to increase, like in general, right? So what kinds of things do you recommend for patients to stay healthy during the flu season?
Really just taking care of yourself, get good rest, and ultimately listening to your body. When your body says it's had enough, you need to stop, listen to your body. your body's giving you these signals and cues because it's telling you that you need to slow down or you need some help. Otherwise, you're going to get sick. So focusing on yourself rather than just waiting for the symptoms to happen. Being proactive instead of reactive in a case like this is super important.
Well, that's awesome. I wish you all the best of luck with your move to your new downtown location. Thanks so much, Dr. Henke. Sean Henke is the clinical director of East Meets West Health Center, also known as 608 Health, to come to their new downtown location beginning early next year. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
The federal government continues its fight against climate change with a number of bills and proposals. Some say this is making for great progress. Others believe it's highly ineffective. Joining me to discuss this is Dr. Ross McKittrick, a professor of economics at the University of Guelph and a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute. Dr. McKittrick, thank you so much for joining me today via Skype from Guelph.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Absolutely. Now, you wrote an article in the Financial Post on the proposed federal CFS, or Clean Fuel Standard. Can you tell us what exactly the Clean Fuel Standard requires from us?
Well, the standard is it's not directed at ordinary air pollution. It's directed at trying to reduce the amount of carbon dioxide that is released from the fuel being burned. And the only way you can really do that is to blend in various forms of biofuels. So it'll mean blending in more ethanol into gasoline and biogas into natural gas. And the hope is that on a life cycle or an engineering basis, there's less carbon dioxide emissions from that blended fuel. The effect of this will be, because these are more expensive fuel streams, biogas and ethanol are more expensive to produce than regular fuel, it will raise the cost of fuels. Depending on how stringent the target is, one estimate from the Canadian Energy Research Institute is that the price of natural gas could be pushed up by about 60% to fully comply with this rule. They may not push it that far. It's still a bit hard to tell, but it'll also add probably 5 to 10 cents per liter to the price of gasoline. And the effect of this, the government hopes they will reduce national carbon dioxide emissions or greenhouse gas emissions by about 30 megatons, which would get us partway to the Paris climate target, but certainly wouldn't be enough to get us there.
Right. So although the term biofuel may sound good because it requires fertilizer, water, and land to produce, that process itself can increase pollution. And some say it costs more in energy to produce than you would actually end up saving. Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, that is right. If you start with, for instance, a crop of corn, to turn it into ethanol is a very energy-intensive process. And a lot of it is actually done in the United States, where they use electricity from a very fossil fuel-intensive electricity grid. So that's why when we look at the actual emission reduction from switching to ethanol, you have to look at it on this life cycle basis. And if it's in the end, if it's actually the case that you get lower emissions from ethanol, it's not lower by much. It's lower at the tailpipe level, but it's on the life cycle basis. Some estimates are that depending on where you get the ethanol from, we actually would increase total emissions.
Okay, so the whole point of the Clean Fuel Standard is to reduce carbon emissions from the use of fossil fuels. But we already have a carbon tax that's being imposed. So why do we also need the CFS forced upon producers and consumers?
Yeah, that's a good question. The rationale for the carbon tax is it gives everybody a financial incentive to find the cheapest way possible to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. In economics, we like those kinds of policies because then you can say, all right, we're going to agree on how much emission reduction we're going to achieve. This is the way to do it at the lowest possible cost. But that only works if then the government stands back and lets the system work. if they let the market find those solutions under the incentive of the carbon tax. What they're doing here is actually undermining the carbon tax, because they're saying to the fuel producers and the fuel users, all right, you still have to pay the carbon tax, but we're also going to add this extra set of rules. Specifically, you have to blend in all these biofuels into the liquid and gas stream. And it's happening at a much higher cost than the cost of complying with the carbon tax. So they've really unraveled the efficiency aspect of the carbon tax doing it this way, but of course they're still requiring us to pay it.
Yeah, this doesn't sound like an economically feasible plan, but will it actually make a difference? Will it reduce carbon emissions significantly, especially as our population continues to grow and demand for fuel continues as well?
There's a conflict between the goal of reaching the Paris targets and holding our emissions permanently below the target level, and also trying to increase the workforce much more rapidly than we've done in the past. And the government's trying to pursue both goals at once. The reality is that the population growth that they have in mind over the next few years will more than offset any of the reductions from the clean fuel standard. We ran into this problem with the Kyoto Protocol many years ago. A lot of people have forgotten all about that, but the government of the day signed a treaty in Kyoto promising to get our emissions down by a fairly ambitious amount and keep them down after 2010. And then it just turned out to be very expensive to do that, because the technology isn't available that would let us use fossil fuels the way we do in a large, cold, spread out country like we have. We can't use fossil fuels to run our cars and heat our homes and get emissions down by the amount that they promised. So we ended up abandoning the Kyoto commitment. We're going to run into the same problem with Paris, that the government they can put these policies forward. They're very expensive to try. In the end, they don't actually accomplish what the government hopes that they will. And so something's got to give at the end of the day.
Mm-hmm. Why is net zero so important to the government? Why do we have to get there regardless of costs? Carbon dioxide in and of itself isn't a pollutant. Is it not, in fact, very necessary for a healthy planet?
Well, yeah, carbon dioxide has never been regulated in the past because it's not a local air contaminant. We regulate carbon monoxide and particulates and sulfur dioxide and other forms of local air pollution. But we didn't used to regulate carbon dioxide because, as you say, it is a natural part of the atmosphere and it's essential for plant life. What's happening now, though, is with fossil fuel consumption, that does release carbon dioxide emissions. And the concern is that over the long term, that can have an effect on the climate. And so the idea of going to net zero carbon dioxide emissions, which is a far more radical target even than the Paris Accord targets, the government seems to have adopted that without much in the way of a discussion with the public about why we need to do that, how much it would cost, and whether there would even be any benefits of doing it. And even though they pushed the deadline forward into the future, they are already proposing, like the Clean Fuel Standard, some policies that if they go ahead with them, they will be very expensive for people. And I think people deserve a better accounting from the government about why it is that they think this is so important to do and just how much they expect people to pay.
Interesting. Now, green activists argue that clean energy will be an economic boost to Canada, and we shouldn't worry about the fossil fuel industry ending because we can quickly replace it with green energy. So how realistic is that?
It's not at all realistic. I've been hearing the same thing now for 20 years or more. Every time the government proposes one of these policies, you will have environmentalists and also sometimes the representatives of the renewable fuels industry or the wind energy industry coming along and saying, don't worry, there'll be lots of jobs in these new sectors. Typically, though, for instance, our experience in Ontario going the green energy route, they said it wouldn't affect electricity prices, but the reality was our prices more than doubled. And they said that it would create a lot of new jobs. And the reality was that because the increased electricity prices and the loss of manufacturing that went along with that, we lost at least 2 jobs for every job that was created in the renewable energy sector. And then the renewable energy sector jobs are only temporary anyway. Once the turbines are built and the solar panels are built, there aren't really ongoing jobs in that sector. So it is not the case that green energy is an economic opportunity. If it was an economic opportunity, you wouldn't need to force people to do it. The market would just pursue the opportunity the way people pursue any other profitable opportunity. The reason we have these policies is precisely because the market realizes these are money-losing industries and they don't create jobs.
Interesting point. Now, you point out also that we all want clean fuel, but apparently for every dollar of environmental benefit from the CFS, we actually lose $6 of income and wealth. Can you explain that?
Yeah, so that comes from tallying up the costs of compliance with the regulation and then also the indirect cost to the rest of the economy from the higher fuel prices and the reduction in the value of investments and things like that. And then, so you have that on one side of the ledger. And then on the other side, we look at, well, what are the benefits of reducing the emissions? And right now, the government sets the carbon tax rate based on scientific estimates of what is the benefit of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. And so if we take the maximum value from that schedule and we say, okay, we'll value the emission reductions using the government's own estimate, then it turns out the costs of the policy are 6 times larger than the benefits. So we can say, yeah, we'll take the government at its word that these emission reductions are valuable, but that's not the end of the story. We are incurring much larger costs to get those emission reductions. And going back to the point of the carbon tax, one of the essential pieces of logic of the carbon tax is it says we'll pursue emission reductions, but only up to the point where the costs of further reductions end up costing more than the benefits. And that's why we initially would go with a carbon tax type policy, because then it ensures that you don't get into a situation like we are in with the clean fuel standard where we're getting emission reductions, but the costs are far in excess of the benefits.
Now, the federal government also recently tabled new legislation, Bill C-12, that would force current and future federal governments to set binding climate targets to get Canada to net zero carbon by 2050. Any thoughts on what this means for Canadians? Should we be concerned about potential increases in taxes? And what about the impact this might have on things like the cost of gas, groceries, home heating, and anything we purchase?
Yeah, these are all valid concerns because in order to accomplish the goal, you have to make energy a lot more expensive. There's just no way you can function in a country like Canada without using energy. And if you are going to get people to use less energy, you have to make it more expensive. Now, the legislation, it's a bit tricky for one government to say they're going to bind all future governments to this plan. Really, all a government can do is bind itself to a plan, but they can't pass a law today that every government from now on is bound by, because a future government can always repeal the legislation if they want. I think the concern that's raised here, though, is just it signals that the current government is absolutely determined to pursue this path, and they are not particularly concerned about how much it's going to cost people, and they're not really listening to that side of the story.
Is anyone thinking about how excessive spending on climate change is impacting other areas where tax dollars would be put to much better use? Like maybe healthcare, education, fighting crime, reducing poverty, the list could go on.
Well, we think about that sort of thing in the economics profession. I don't think it's nearly prominent enough in the discussion. So going back to the green energy example in Ontario, because of these very high electricity prices, the government has said they're going to help some of our manufacturing and industry groups with lower electricity prices by transferring the cost of some of those expensive green energy contracts onto the taxpayer, basically putting it into the government budget. And that's going to be $3 to $3.5 billion per year just to get the burden off the manufacturing sector for the electricity costs. Now you think about what that means. That's a pharmacare program that we're not able to have because the money is going to cover these contracts. That's services for families with disabled children. That's upgrading hospitals in smaller communities. That's a lot of things that aren't going to happen because we are paying for contracts for electricity that we could have got much cheaper. We didn't need to pay that money in the first place. It's wasted money. And with something like the Clean Fuel Standard, you're asking people to pay maybe 50 or 60% more for the same natural gas that they were getting previously. And you have to ask, for what? And that's money out of household budgets. That's going to mean money out of farm budgets that they have to pass on to consumers in higher food prices. Yes, these are all absolutely legitimate questions. And the sad thing, as far as I can see, is that no, the government is not particularly interested in these questions.
Thanks so much, Dr. McKittrick, for your insight. Dr. Ross McKittrick, Professor of Economics at the University of Guelph and a Senior Fellow at the Fraser Institute. Thanks so much for joining me today.
My pleasure.
A story we recently had on Bridge City News was that hundreds of schoolboys were abducted by a gunman in western Nigeria. To talk about this in more detail is Greg Musselman from Voice of the Martyrs, who joins me from St. Albert, Alberta. Greg, what's the latest? Have the kids been released?
Yeah, well, that's all the reports that we've been getting. In fact, we know that they've been released because they have returned to their towns in Katsina State, which is in the northern part of Nigeria. The question is, have all the boys been released? Now, the school has about 800 boys, and over 300 of them were kidnapped. Many of them escaped. Some of them even were under threat of getting killed. They were running into the bush, but they were held by the Boko Haram. At least the Boko Haram have claimed that they did this. And some negotiations may have went on, we don't know, but the area where these boys were being held, and I think, well over 300, it's not easy to hide that many. So the Nigerian military surrounded the area. Whether there were negotiations, whether a ransom was paid, we don't know that. And there has been some reports that maybe some Boko Haram soldiers have been released. We don't know though. The government is denying ransom. They're denying that there was prisoners released in exchange for these boys being returned to their homes. So again, as you know, in this part of Africa, there's so many things that are going on. Eventually, perhaps the full story will come out. But the good news is that most of the boys have now been returned, hopefully all of them. And, just even reading some of the comments from the parents, they are absolutely overjoyed that their kids have been returned.
Now, was this from a Christian school? Were these Christian kids?
No, this is a government school. And from what I understand, most of the kids would have been Muslim. But the Boko Haram, yes, they target Christians. That's one of the things they do. They go into villages, they loot, they kill, they burn things down, they kill men, kidnap girls, kidnap women. But in this case, it was the education that they're coming against. And they see education as being very Western and anti-Islamic. And so anything that gets in the way of their ideology of turning northern Nigeria, then eventually the whole country, into an Islamic state under Sharia law, anybody that doesn't go along with that, militant brand of Islam, they are targets for violence.
Greg, why doesn't the Nigerian government put its foot down and put a stop to extremist groups like the Fulani herdsmen, or a group they apparently like to emulate like Boko Haram, which causes so much havoc throughout Nigeria?
Yeah, that is a good question. One of our partners, his name is Yunusa Madu, and he is the CEO of Christian Solidarity Worldwide Nigeria, one of the organizations that we work with. And I asked them that very same question. And this was in light of attack after attack of Christian villages. And then we saw video of all these children, women, men that had been killed. There was like over 20 in one village. And there was like more than 600 Christians for the first 5 months of this year that had been killed. And I asked them that very question, so why is the Nigerian government not doing more? And he said either they are incapable or they are, they don't want to, or they don't care. Now, interesting that, all these stories, and, we could talk for the next 2 hours just about stories in the last couple of months that have been taking place, in Kaduna State, in Plateau State, and other places in the central part of Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria. But it didn't have the, the exposure, the media exposure, and the outrage in Nigeria and around the world. And, President Buhari said, okay, please be patient with us. We're going to try to do something here. In fact, the state Katsina there is where actually the president is from. And he's just saying, please give us patience. But what started after these boys were taken was the Bring Back the Boys. And that has drawn a lot of attention and now putting pressure on the Nigerian government. And, again, many of these students, young men, were Muslim. And the outrage maybe is higher because they're not Christian. I don't know. But there is, I'm praying that there is a change of tide here, and they will at least try to get some security. Because can you imagine living in a village with your family, your wife and children, and never knowing when these Boko Haram or Fulani herdsmen are going to come in, or Islamic State, affiliates as well, and cause havoc? So our prayer is that the Nigerian government would finally do something.
Greg, let's move over to Pakistan for just a moment here, where a young lady named Arzu was abducted from her family home and forced into Islam, marrying a much older man. How much older are we talking about?
Yeah, in his 40s, 13 years old. And in this story, involving Azuz Raja, was a neighbor of this particular man. His name is Ali Azhar, and he was already married, had children. And I guess he saw this young girl and he thought, I think I'll take her. Now, and you have to understand, within many of these Islamic villages where Christians are minorities, only about 1.6% of the population of Pakistan is Christian. And they have the worst jobs. They are considered the lowest of the lows. And, an older guy sees a pretty girl, says, I should have her. So that's what he did. He literally kidnapped her while her parents were out, 13 years old. And the thing that makes this really disheartening is that when the parents learned what had happened, they went to the police. They knew who had taken Arzu, and the police just basically brushed them off. No, she has converted to Islam. False papers were given saying that she was over 18 and she has made, a free will decision to become Muslim and to marry this man. Now, in Pakistan, you have to be 18 years old of age or older to legally get married without your parents' permission. They did not get permission. Papers were falsified. She probably signed the document saying she accepted Islam by force. She was sexually assaulted and raped. And, it's just a horrible situation. Now, there's about 1,000 of these cases a year that happen. And, I personally find these ones the most difficult. I've got 3 daughters. I've got a granddaughter now, and I cannot imagine if that happened to me. And then it makes it worse is that the police and the authorities often don't do anything. But pressure was applied in this particular case, and this man was arrested. He has been charged with rape and kidnapping, and the people that helped him to falsify the documents, including a lawyer, have now been arrested. And I hope he's going away for a long time, that, justice needs to be served here. Arzu was put into a shelter when this was happening, before things get straightened out.
Sure.
And just before she was put into the shelter, her father, when he heard the decision that his daughter was to be returned to this man while it was being sorted out, and he was on the 2nd story of this courthouse, and he was going to jump to his death. Oh, fortunately, there were human rights workers and lawyers there that, pulled him back and just said, Kate, please don't do that. That'll make it even worse. So Arzu was taken into a shelter, and that is where she is currently. She is free to go home, but she doesn't want to go home now. And the feeling is that she has been so brainwashed and she is under fear. Not only, this particular man that did this, but also other Muslims in the community are saying that they're going to kill the family if she's returned. And it's a horrible thing. And unfortunately, Hal, this goes on all the time. We hear so many stories. It is so disheartening. The Christians are so, persecuted there. And then, this is the worst kind of persecution when you attack the children this way. And in many of the cases that we have seen, some of these young ladies have already had children, and they're far underage. And hopefully the government of Pakistan will start doing something now, especially as international pressure is applied.
Greg, you mentioned that Pakistan has a very small Christian population, the percentage like 1.6 points, 1.6%. But how many are actually turning away from Islam to Jesus right now? And how dangerous is it for people to convert to Christianity?
Well, there's we don't hear the huge numbers like we do in some other countries like China or even Iran and in parts of Africa. But I do know that people are turning to Christianity. They're leaving Islam. In fact, I have a friend that I keep in constant contact with. He's in the northern part of Pakistan, which is the most dangerous place, Taliban territory. He is a former Muslim, and he has suffered greatly. In fact, a few years ago, I was in a Bible college in Pakistan teaching the theology of persecution and discipleship. And some of the students that were there, people that I ended up interviewing and getting their stories, and they come from Muslim backgrounds, and they have had it very, very difficult times. It's and not only for them, but also for their family as they're threatened. So and whether it's Pakistan or other places, Muslim countries, Middle East, whatever, is the harshest persecution is often against the Muslim converts. But God has been doing an amazing work among Muslim people around the world, dreams and visions, and that's happening in Pakistan. People are turning to the Lord, and and we may not even know the statistics because of the dangers that are involved, but with our partners and the people I personally met, they are turning to Jesus, but they are also paying a huge price. So it's a very, very dangerous place. And many Pakistani Christians have left the country. Some have come to Canada. Many are currently over in Bangkok, Thailand, basically in detention, trying to get to Canada, Australia, Western Europe, wherever it is. And of course, we don't want all the Christians to leave Pakistan, but I understand if you've got children, and I help sponsor a family to come to Canada. They have 2 young daughters because of the story that I just told you about our zoos. And so, it is hard for them there, but God is working. The kingdom of God will always move forward. The Holy Spirit is drawing people to himself, but in the midst of that is very, very harsh for them.
Now, Greg, Pakistan's neighbor, India, also has a long history of persecuting Christians, and incidents of persecution are going up. Why is that the case?
Well, it probably goes back, it goes back centuries, but particularly the last 10 or so years, there has been a real rise up of militant Hinduism. And particularly when Prime Minister Modi was elected in what's called the BJP. It's a very radical Hindu organization, government. It covers all sorts of things. And really their motto is, if you are Indian, you are Hindu. And Muslims also, I might add, in India suffer incredible persecution as well. But we hear stories, at least one every day, from somewhere in India. It's a huge nation, second most populous in the world behind China. But again, if you are not following Hinduism, you are a fair target. And you get some of these states like Tamil Nadu, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, that are really suffering, and the levels of persecution are increasing. There's a young man named Kandi Modi, and he was recently killed for his faith in India. 27-year-old man. These militants knocked on his door. They dragged him out, and his wife and his young children were there. And knowing almost for certain that he was going to be killed, he told his wife, "Be strong in the faith. Do not deny Jesus." And he was hauled off and he was murdered.
Wow.
And,
Greg, now when it comes to a country which is seeing the fastest growth of Christianity around the world, you say it's actually Iran, another Muslim nation?
Yeah, this is a fantastic story because, again, there is persecution, and we hear of, people like an Ibrahim that we know of there. Farouzi, he was sentenced to 6 years in prison. This is back about 7-8 years ago, and then he was put into exile, and so those kind of, and again, a Muslim convert. But Iran, 1979, just a brief history here, it became under Islamic law, or became more radical. It was supposed to be the perfect utopian Islamic state. Well, that never happened. Ayatollah Khomeini, remember that, and after the Shah of Iran, and but it never delivered. high divorce rate, drug addiction, unemployment. People have become very discouraged. The only nation in the world ruled by clerics. And so the people there are tired of it, and especially the young people. Now, not all of them are turning to Jesus. Many are just turning away from God altogether. But many, especially the young people, are turning to Christ. And my friend down in Dallas, he's a former Muslim and works with Iran Alive Ministries, Dr. Hermos Shariat. And he was telling, his goal is to see 1 million Muslims come to Jesus. But they have a ministry that broadcasts on satellite television, through the internet. And he was telling me, this is just recent, and again, Iran having the fastest rate of growth of any church in the world. He said just their ministry, and it's hard for people to call out of Iran, but 50 people on average were coming to Jesus every single week.
Wow.
Since COVID, 500 on average
Wow.
are coming to the Lord. And that's, I mean, again, if you go into Jeremiah the prophecy, it talks about God setting up his throne in a place called Elam, which is modern day Iran. The prophetic future for Iran is absolutely amazing. It is going to come under judgment for sure. God is going to do amazing things and is doing amazing things as Iranians are scattering around the world. But within the country, God is raising up an army, and most of them are having, of course, to meet in secret. And if they are found out, they are persecuted. Not to go back to Islam. The government doesn't seem to care about that, but they exile them. They don't even mind if they leave the country. But it's a phenomenal thing that the Lord is doing in Iran at this hour.
So, Greg, we only have about a minute left here. Let's discuss quickly the persecution of Christians in Asia, including China and North Korea. Is the church making any inroads right now, or are believers being forced underground?
Yeah, I mean, in China, I mean, it's growing like crazy, of course. I've heard studies that out of Purdue University in the U.S. saying in the next 10 years, another 95 million Christians will be added to God's kingdom in China. North Korea is interesting. You asked me that. I was talking to Dr. Eric Foley with Voice of the Martyrs Korea in Seoul. We talked last night, and they are sending balloons into North Korea. Well, the South Korean government has now made that illegal because of pressure from North Korea. But still, the gospel is getting in there. They're getting amazing responses. And during COVID, the military people of North Korea are so fearful that if they get COVID, they could get executed or exiled. They're afraid to go to the homes of anybody, especially the Christians. And as a result, they actually right now have a little bit of freedom, and they're meeting, they're worshiping together and studying God's word. And the gospel is going forward in North Korea.
It's amazing how God works. Greg Musselman from Voice of the Martyrs, thanks for joining me today from St. Albert, Alberta.
Thanks, Hal.
On behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News, I'm Hal Roberts. God bless and thanks for watching.